RFK Jr. held a press conference after Joe Biden stepped aside. And of course, he says that he's the only one who could beat Donald Trump. He also called out Trump and his plans to instill swamp-like creatures into the White House, into the administration once he gets in power. We're going to play a couple of clips from this press conference that he held. This guy's got a right to be really irked. I mean, there he was running as a Democrat. When he announced his campaign, they said, no way, we're not going to even entertain it. Joe Biden is our guy. I mean, I think he has a lawsuit against them. A real legitimate, him, Marianne Williamson, and Dean Phillips they should just band together and sue the crap out of the DNC for just telling no, Joe Biden is our guy. We've made up our minds. The voters have made up their minds. There he is. And they just get rid of all of these others who are trying to get into the race. And then they now have anointed their Kamala Harris, is what it's looking like increasingly. So, I mean, I would just be so upset if I were RFK Jr. But let's play the first clip here. He is calling out the swamp, says that both sides are the swamp. He also says JD Vance is a salute to the CIA and the intelligence community and to the military industrial complex. I'm going to break down why he's saying that. Let's watch.
I want to add that a little over a year ago, when I entered this race, I predicted that President Biden suffered from a degenerative condition that was not going to improve and that it would make it impossible for him to govern effectively. The reaction of the DNC to that obvious condition was to hide it from the American public and to use their power over the Democratic Party nomination process to make sure that nobody could compete with President Biden in a way that would expose his deficiencies. And as a result, we are where we are today, which is in a period of crisis. And we have two crises, and they both derive from the same condition. And that condition is the emergence of the domination of corporate power over American democracy that accelerated beginning in 2010 with the Citizens United case that unleashed a tsunami of corporate money into the American political process. And both parties are now captured by that corporate money. And they've lost any kind of authentic connection to the American people or to the populist goals of the Republic and of democracy. On the Republican side, President Biden promised the last time around that he was going to drain the swamp. But instead, he came in and he appointed a pharmaceutical lobbyist and CEO to run HHS, Verizon lobbyist to run the FCC, a Goldman Sachs CEO to run the Treasury Department, an oil lobbyist to run the Interior Department, a coal lobbyist to run the Environmental Protection Agency, and so on. And only today, President Trump has announced that in his new administration, should he win this election, that Jamie Dimon will be his choice as Commerce Secretary, and that Larry Fink, the director of BlackRock, will run the Treasury Department. This is the swamp. These are swamp creatures. And his pick as vice president is a salute to the CIA and to the intelligence community and to the military industrial complex. Their gravy train is going to continue.
Okay, so what does he mean by JD Vance being a salute to the CIA and to the intelligence community and to the military industrial complex? Well, this has to do with reports that JD Vance was propelled to the main stage by Peter Thiel. So Peter Thiel is the mega billionaire the PayPal billionaire who apparently heavily funded Vance. Vance was a never Trumper, and then he slowly became a pro-Trumper, apparently, MAGA, through time, but people are very suspicious of him. And they're particularly suspicious because he's been promoted by Peter Thiel, who's a main donor of the Trump campaign, Vance's main donor, and now suddenly Vance is the VP pick. Well, Peter Thiel is responsible for a company called Planeteer. Planeteer is a data gathering and analysis company that has a lot of contracts with the government. In fact, here's the Vox article on this. Everything you need to know about Palantir, the secretive company coming for all your data. Says in the earlier days of the COVID-19 pandemic, many of the country's public health departments, still reliant on fax machines, were woefully unprepared for the massive amounts of data they needed to process. Looking for a tidy private sector solution to a messy government problem, the Department of Health and Human Services paid a shadowy Silicon Valley company with ties to the Trump administration to build something new. That company is called Palantir Technologies, and if you don't know much about it, that's by design. A lot of that could change in the coming months. However, Palantir is about to go public. Now, this was written in 2020, by the way. Palantir specializes in data gathering and analysis, most of which it does for government agencies. It has about $1.5 billion in federal government contracts alone, including recently with the Space Force and the Navy. In July, with new COVID-19 case numbers breaking records daily, the HHS announced an abrupt shift in how that data would be reported. Hospitals would now report their data exclusively to HHS Protect, a new platform Palantir developed that would be run by another private company called Teletracking. This would effectively replace the Center for Disease Control and Prevention's National Healthcare Safety Network per the Trump administration's orders to hospitals to stop reporting their information to it. HHS Protect, which was not accessible to the general public, was now the only source for this information. So Palantir, the architect of this complete data system, isn't a household name like its Palo Alto peers, but the 17-year-old company founded by Peter Thiel is one of the most valuable private companies in Silicon Valley. That anonymity is a feature, not a bug. Palantir does most of its work for the government, including national security and intelligence operations. Its recently released financial documents say the company hopes to extend that reach even further, taking advantage of the Trump administration's push to use commercial products rather than build its own to become the default operating system for data across the U.S. government. So in recent years, headlines about the company have stressed its access to everything about all of us, which privacy advocates have long criticized. Palantir's data mining software has been credited with killing Osama bin Laden and blamed for tearing unauthorized immigrant families apart. As the notoriously secretive surveillance startup that the White House is entrusting with the nation's coronavirus data is about to go public, some details of how the company works and the Trump administration-inspired vision are too. So there is, Whitney Webb has actually done an incredible amount of research and detailed deep dives into Palantir and how sinister it is and the amount of data it's gathering from us. And Peter Thiel is behind all of that. And Peter Thiel is a major donor to the Trump campaign. And Peter Thiel is the person responsible for propelling Vance to the position he's in today. So a lot of people that are looking at these connections, Donald Trump, when he originally ran in 2016, it was this kind of idea of, look, I got all the money in the world. I don't need the big money donors. I'm the billionaire that can back my own campaign, so I don't have to be bought by anybody. But the reality of the situation is that he has taken an enormous amount of money from a lot of different groups, and they're not in our favor as the people. They're just not. These are companies, large organizations that don't have you or my best interest in mind. They instead are thinking of themselves, and they're thinking of their client. And who is their client? Who's Palantir's client? Well, the intelligence community, the military industrial complex. So that is what I think Robert F. Kennedy is referring to when he says that J.D. Vance is a salute. That pick for VP is a salute to the CIA and to the intelligence community and to the military industrial complex, as their gravy train is going to continue. That's what I think he means by that. Now let's play the next clip. He goes on and he talks quite a bit about the budget. He says, look, these guys, they never talk about the debt. You'll never hear Biden or Trump talking about the deficit because they both ran it into the ground. He says Trump actually added more to the deficit than any other president, all of the presidents combined since George Washington, and Biden is set to beat that record. So when it comes to the actual deficit, none of them are doing anything. He also goes on to talk about healthcare, saying that today 1 out of every 3 children who walk through offices of the doctor's office is diabetic, and nobody's talking about why this is happening. The cost of dealing with mitochondrial disorders, our children dysfunction, which is diabetes, is now greater than our military budget. The biggest cost to our nation is the cost of treating chronic disease. 4.3 trillion annually. It's 5 times the price of our military budget, and nobody's talking about why did autism go from 1 in 10,000 that my generation and 70-year-old men today right now, sorry, my transcript's a little bit wonky, but you get the idea. He talks about the debt. He talks about the chronic illness and disease in this country and how neither of these candidates are dealing with any of this. And then he talks about the capture of our agencies and the industries that they're supposed to be regulating. The government's supposed to regulate these industries, but instead they've been captured by these industries. They're being funded by these industries, so they're just turned into sock puppets. And he's saying that, they're supposed to be protecting us from this, and they're not. They're instead just acting on behalf of these big corporate interests. And then he goes into the most existential issue of all, and he says the toxic division that is destroying our country. And he goes on to say only he can defeat Donald Trump. Watch this.
And finally, the most existential issue of all, the toxic division that is destroying our country. And President Biden's the attempted assassination of President Trump this week is a symptom of that toxicity. We're now more polarized in this country than at any time since the American Civil War. And nobody can see an ending to this. If President Biden gets elected, it's going to become more toxic. If President Trump gets elected, it's going to become more polarized. And neither of these men, both of them recognize this is existential. But neither of them can do anything about it. Why? Because they feed on it. They feed it. They fuel it. And they are the products of that division. So we need a leader who can stop feeding into the vitriol, stop feeding into the anger, stop feeding into the marginalization, the polarization, and who can find those values that bring Americans together rather than focusing on these toxic issues that are intended to keep us all apart. And it's the BlackRock, the State Street, the JP Morgan who are profiting from that division. The very people that President Trump has promised to appoint to run our government who are profiting on it, because it's like the jangling of keys. They're saying, look over here, look at abortion, look at freedom of choice, look at trans rights, look at gun rights. And while we're all staring at each other's throats on those issues, on the jangling keys, they're robbing the bank over here. They're shifting the wealth upward to this new oligarchy of billionaires. And both President Trump and President Biden engineered the lockdowns. In 500 days, they created 500 new billionaires. And they shifted $4.3 trillion northward from the American middle class to this new aristocracy that we have. And it's destroying our country. We need a change. If people want more of the same, they can vote Democrat and they can vote Republican. The only way we're going to get a change in this country is if people come together behind the one candidate who is independent, who has vowed to have a unity government, to bring Republicans and Democrats and others all together in a way that finds common ground in our country. A candidate who's the only candidate who's pro-choice, who's pro-environment, who's pro-civil rights, and who beats Donald Trump by 14%. There is no other candidate who can beat Donald Trump. Look at all the polls that have been done over the last year. I beat Donald Trump and nobody else can. Thank you very much.
So there he is, obviously trying to get that Democratic nomination. He's trying to get them to turn around and say, okay, RFK Jr. is our guy, especially since he was running as a Democrat initially, and then he switched to independent when they stonewalled him. They told him he couldn't, it was all Biden, and that's it. Biden, go home. Well, RFK Jr. is now saying that if the Democrats were to come and knocking, he would he would have a conversation with them and he would potentially go back and run as a Democrat. But that's not going to happen. That's really not going to happen. I do think, though, that people will look at the ballot. A lot of these Democrats that just cannot stomach Donald Trump, and a lot of independents that can't stomach, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. And I think that a lot of Democrats are going to look at the ballot and they're going to see an alternative name. They're going to see Kennedy, and they're going to think, I don't like Donald Trump. I'm not voting for him, but I also really don't like Kamala Harris. And I think Kennedy now, with Harris being the presumptive Democratic nominee, I do think that he will take more votes now from Democrats than previously. That would be my assumption. And it's not because Kamala Harris is a woman and nobody likes a woman. And Bobby Kennedy's a white man. It's because people just they don't know what Kamala Harris stands for. She was a terrible candidate in her 2020 campaign. She herself she can't answer any questions. She's just clearly a puppet for the puppet masters. And people are really uncomfortable with that. So I think Bobby's right. If the Democrats if they were smart, they would put him on the ballot, and he'd probably, I would believe the polls at that point if that potentially Trump would lose to Kennedy. I think that's a real actual possibility. I don't see Kamala Harris being a possibility in defeating Donald Trump. Can I make one point too before we move on this? One thing I've been seeing a lot of online, which I find really despicable, is this sexualization of Kamala Harris, right? They're saying, oh, she slept her way to the top, or she just, she's really kind of talking about her sex life a lot. That is not the way. Look, Democrats did that with Trump. They've done this with Kavanaugh. There's a lot of people that they were doing this with. It's not the right way it didn't work. It doesn't work. And in fact, it has the opposite effect. So why would Republicans, the voting base, and even some Republicans, prominent Republicans, why would they go down that road when they saw how ineffective it was against their own people? And in fact, it had the opposite effect. And it is having the opposite effect, I think, with independent voters. Look, your base, your echo chamber will vote blue no matter who. That's how the Democrats will vote. Republicans will vote for Donald Trump. But guess what? The majority of the country is in the middle. The majority of the country isn't Republican or Democrat, and they'll vote for who disgusts them less. And so for them, if Republicans start going down the road of attacking Kamala Harris and putting out these, I've seen some really disgusting memes and things that are being said. And look, like, do it at your own risk. Go down that path at your own risk. But you're just going to turn people off, and they're going to vote for Kamala Harris out of spite. And that's how a lot of people vote. A lot of people don't really pay that much attention to politics. They're not really caring that much. They don't think their lives change a whole lot. So they vote out of spite. And they will vote out of spite if they see this kind of disgusting behavior. There's plenty to criticize her over. Policy is the point. Stick to it. That's enough. That's enough to say she doesn't have any policies and she's just going to be a puppet. That's enough. You're the puppet. No, you're the puppet. You're the puppet. That would be plenty. Same thing with like the Secret Service agents, the women that were guarding Donald Trump. If you want to criticize the fact that these women were shorter than a very tall man and they were asked to protect a very tall man, that was their assignment. They fulfilled they went and did their duty at their assignment, and they risked their lives in that assignment. I find it really offensive to go after those women, to make fun of those women who were not responsible for assigning themselves to that job. You want to get on a woman's case about that, then Director Kimberly Cheadle is the one to get on. That's the woman you criticize, not these women who were actually doing their best. Could they do the job? No, obviously, we saw that. They weren't tall enough to cover his head. I mean, his head was popping out. If somebody's they try to shoot the guy in the head, and his head is standing out there because he's being guarded by all these short women and even short men. That it's fair to criticize the fact that they were ever even assigned that job, but to criticize them personally, I don't think that's fair. These are people that put their lives on the line for this country and for your candidate. I mean, the people that I'm seeing make fun of these women, they're Trump supporters. These women were guarding Trump. I mean, they risked their lives for your guy, and you make fun of them. I mean, come on, guys. We got to be better than this. We have to be better than this as a country. This is just getting, keep your eye on the ball. There's plenty to criticize. there's plenty to go after, and there's plenty of ways to win without resorting to, these types of attacks and just kind of this really terrible, disgusting behavior that really makes our nation look really ridiculous. You want to talk about morals and ethics and how other countries are looking at us and how we've devolved into these woke, we're all going trans and all this weird stuff, right? And you say, oh, these other countries are looking at us and they're seeing that we've just devolved, that we are a classless, disgusting, moralless, ethicless society. You're only adding to that when you go down this road of, these types of attacks, these personal attacks. We just don't need to do it unless it's warranted. A type of personal attack would be like Joe Biden using his position to enrich his family. That is somewhat personal, but it's also a policy point, and it's an important one. And those are the types of attacks that we can lob, and I think they're legitimate and fair. Hey guys, this was just a clip of a longer show. Catch the full show by going to KimIversonShow.com. It is free. It airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You could go back now and watch this full interview. I highly recommend it. Again, go to KimIversonShow.com. Thank you so much for watching.